We're into the second part of our tutorial for how to do elevations and sections in Photoshop. You'll remember from part one that we're working on a small house that belongs to a friend of mine. He's renovating an old house. We're drawing the elevation of the existing building and we're drawing the section through the extension that he's proposing. We started by importing a PDF into Photoshop, which was essentially a line drawing. And the method that we're using is to create layers which have masks attached, and then we fill these layers with materials that we create from swatches. In part two of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is repeat a lot of the exercises that we did in the first part, with just some slight variations. This time I'm going to give you minimum instruction. I'm just going to suggest what it is that you should be doing next. If you get lost, you can just refer to the video and play it back, and hopefully you can get back on track. And then in part 3 and part 4, we'll do some new stuff. We'll look at adjustment layers and we'll work with PNGs. And we look at some very, very basic techniques on how to bring a little bit of refinement to your drawing when you think you're nearly finished. Okay, let's get started. This bit should be quite straightforward. We have some materials and textures which we assigned in the first tutorial, but we have those layers switched off. So the first thing we're going to do now is we're going to go inside the building, inside the extension, and we're going to identify this wall here, which you can see has a television and a small stove on it. And we're going to make that, we're going to give that a timber finish. So first we'll select it, and then we'll make a new layer from our selection, and we'll create a mask. So we're off to a good start. If you like, you can rename that layer now. Now we need to make a timber material for this wall. So remember, to do this, we go to the internet, we find a sample that we like, download it. We call it a swatch, and then we use this swatch to define a pattern. Make sure the layer with the swatch on it is selected, go to Edit and Define Pattern. Remember, the system we're using is that we're creating all our materials in one file. Now, this is not the only way that you can do it. There are lots of different ways to do it, but we're just doing it this way for the sake of the tutorial because it makes things, I think, clear when we're starting out. Remember, the last time we were using this file, we were making timber windows and timber door frames, so that's why this layer is still active. Now, this time when the dialog box comes up, you might want to mess around with it a little bit and see what it does. It's extremely straightforward. Now, as it happens, I'm not going to make any changes to the settings because they'll do me fine. So let's bring this new timber material that we've made into our drawing. I kind of like this kind of material, you know, this sort of plywood finish look. So we'll use our mask now to just show the amount of the timber that we need. We have to copy the mask up onto the correct layer. And we can get rid of whatever layers we don't really need. Reduce the clutter. It's always a good idea. Keep an eye on your layer names. Just make sure everything has a name you're going to remember. Okay, that'll do us for the time being. So let's switch off that layer and move on to the next stage. And for this next stage, I think what we'll do is we'll do something about this timber door here. That's a timber door. I should have explained that earlier. And this louver structure beside it. That's an exterior timber louver or a brise-soleil. So let's give them a timber material. So you're going to need a layer and a layer mask, and then you're going to have to find that timber material we previously made. We'll use the same thing we used for the windows and the doors. And we'll apply this timber finish to the mask we've just created. Always check to get rid of any layers that aren't doing anything for you. You may have set up a layer to help you to do something else, but if that's all its function was, well then get rid of that layer. And then if layers need renaming, always take the time to do some renaming. I think that job is done. Just about. So time to move on to the next step, which is this little alcove here in behind the door. This is actually a kitchen in reality, so we might want to give an indication in section that it really is a kitchen. We'll start as usual by making a layer and a layer mask, and then you'll see that I've downloaded an image into its own file, an image that I copied from the internet of a standard generic looking kitchen. And I'm going to copy that into my drawing file now in the same way as we did with our materials. Exact same technique, we just drag the layer across. And when I bring it in, I'm just going to place it roughly where I need it. Now I want to bring the layer that kitchen is on down below the pattern layer so I can see the lines of the drawings. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to take the time to bring some of those layers. I've been a little bit forgetful. Some of those layers that need to be below the pattern, that is the red layer, I'd forgotten to reposition them, so I'm going to do it now and get serious about resizing the kitchen image. I think you can see what I'm at. So now we have a kitchen in the background and another piece of the puzzle is put into place. So let's have a quick look now at how the image is looking. I just switch on all of the layers on which we have material assigned, and it's a little crude obviously. We just have the basics done, but it isn't so bad. I just want to shrink that layer that has the timber plywood pattern on it so that it looks a little bit more to scale. Now you'll see in that plywood wall there are little niches, one where the stove is, the other where the TV is, that I did nothing about the last time when I was applying the timber finish. Well, I just want to go back and pick them up again, and this time all I'm going to do is I'm going to make them in the same timber that the rest of the wall is made from. What I'm going to do at this time is copy the timber layer and create a different mask, which at this stage you should be able to manage pretty much on your own. And then once I've created a different mask, it means I can apply some very basic effects in a couple of minutes and give those niches a sense of depth. Okay, so we have the timber in place, but we won't apply those effects yet. What we'll do first is we'll give a little bit of color to the stove and to the TV. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to create any layer masks at all because these are two tiny little pieces. I'm just going to select them with the magic wand tool and then just splash a bit of paint on them, a bit of black color on them. That's all I'm going to do. Layer masks are very, very useful obviously when you're dealing with larger areas, but on very small things like this, like items of furniture and so on, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to create a layer mask. It's kind of overkill. And while we're at it, I'll just splash a little bit of color as well onto the glass panel on the front of the stove, just for a bit of contrast. A living room isn't going to be a living room without some armchairs. So when you're searching for images of armchairs or furniture on Google, just make sure that you get an elevation view, an end view or a front view, and Google it that way. Just say end elevation sofa or front elevation sofa. Otherwise, you'll get something that has an oblique angle in the image and you won't be able to use it. So as usual, I downloaded an image, I put it into its own file, I got rid of the background, and now I've just dragged it over to our section drawing. I'm going to rescale it. I'm not getting involved here in layer masks because there's no need. So I'll place it, I think it's roughly around the right size. And then I'll make a copy of it because we'll need two armchairs in this room. And so I go up to the edit drop down and then I go to transform and then I select flip horizontal. So now the chairs are facing each other, and now I don't know where exactly these chairs should go in the room. They're not the right chairs for the room, but they'll do. And once I have them roughly in the right place, I'm just going to merge the two layers that they are on. So select the layers, right click, merge layers. There we go. Now I will copy the merged layer. Control J to copy it. And I'm going to move this copy of the merged layer down and to the right. Now with the copy of the armchair layer selected, I'm going to go up to image, choose adjustment, then I choose levels, and just by pushing the slider over you can see I create a silhouette. So I'm making a shadow of the chairs which I'm going to throw on the wall. Now the shadows aren't falling exactly where I want them to be, so I'm just going to erase the bits that I don't want, and I do that by taking the rectangle selection tool, dragging it over the area that I want to get rid of and hitting delete. It's as simple as that. Now I could use a layer mask to do this, but I'm just going to do it this basic way because I think layer masks in some of these situations is overkill. So again, I'm going to eliminate that little piece of shadow. Then I'm going to select the shadow layer and bring the opacity down just a touch, maybe to, I don't know, 30-40%, so that it looks more like a shadow. Now I'm just merging those layers, the layers that have the chairs and the chair shadows on it, but actually I have a better idea. Why don't I undo that and create a group instead? So with both the layer for the armchair and the layer for the armchair shadow selected, I right click, choose group, just call them armchairs and give them a color. I'm not doing it for any particular reason. I don't think I'm going to be coming back to do any more work on either the chairs or the shadows, but it's just another way of doing it. If you want to reduce the number of layers you have in your layer column, but you don't want to merge layers, well, you can group layers, and sometimes it's a useful thing. And then one final operation before we take a break. Let's go back to that layer on which we made the timber panels for the niches for the TV and the stove. We'll just click on that, and we're going to come down to this button down here, which is to make an adjustment layer. This is something that's new to us now. It means that we can add an effect just to that layer. So we're going to add a brightness and contrast effect. And you can see that by performing this operation, a layer is inserted above the layer we're working on. And this is our adjustment layer. And if we want this new adjustment layer just to affect the layer directly below it, we right click and choose create clipping mask. When we do that, it means that any change that we make on the adjustment layer affects only the layer directly below. If we don't do that, it'll affect all layers below. So now with my adjustment layer selected, I have a couple of options available to me. I can travel up here and choose the brightness and contrast slider. And as you can see, it's having a little bit of an effect there on my timber niches. Actually quite a lot of an effect. It's making them darker and makes them appear as if they're a little bit further back from us. It's not the only or even the best way of achieving this effect, but adjustment layers are very useful things. I just thought I'd illustrate them now before we move on to the third part of the tutorial. Okay, well, I think we've done enough for the moment. Let's take a break and get a bit of air. And when we come back in part 3 and part 4, we'll be doing a little bit more with adjustment layers and seeing how they can help us develop a nice image. It strikes me that the most difficult thing about doing a section or an elevation in Photoshop for the first time is knowing how to select things, knowing how to organize information, then knowing how to assign a material to a selection. Everything else is really pretty easy. So from here on in, it should be easy and hopefully a little bit of fun as well. So when you're ready, I'll see you back here for part 3.